Let's see here. All right, so welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening in StratiVentures webinar of inspections. We have Eric Christie with us of Boxer Inspections. One thing about Eric to know, guys, he is our StratiVentures official in-house inspector that we trust so much with all of his knowledge and expertise because he's always live on our Podio members board. And so when members have questions about something that they see at a house, they can call you, right, Eric? They can,
absolutely.
They can, and they don't just get an explanation, they get is a thorough understanding of why he's explaining this to you. So you're actually gaining knowledge, just not just an answer. Another important thing about it is that today is gonna be very important because Eric loves to answer questions. So if you have questions, ask questions, and we'll have a session in a little bit to ask questions. But if you want to tell us a little bit about your background, talk to us about Boxer Inspections, and then we can go ahead and lead off with your presentation. But just also remember, guys, that StratiVentures is a very unique company. Those of you that don't know us, please feel free to email Enid, and Enid will send you company information about us as we are now on a national platform and are starting to work with people around the country, hopefully to bring the great message of SVI and mitigating risk in real estate. So with that, Eric, take it away, sir. Great to have you, buddy.
Hey, thank you, Diego. I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of the investors as always. My company is Boxer Inspections. You can find us pretty much everywhere on the web. We have a web page called Boxer Inspections in Sugar Land, Texas. We have a presence on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have blogs out there. So lots of content out there for folks that want to take a look at what's going on the website. We do put information out there. My website is www.boxerinspections.com, and my email address is info@boxerinspections.com. So we are, as Diego had mentioned, to give you a little background, I spent 26 years in different industries as a design engineer, engineering manager for different companies. So my background is education, and formal education is a mechanical engineer, and I spent a good part of my career doing design and development. But I got out of the oil field several years ago and decided that we were going to go full bore into real estate. And we started our real estate business working with investors in the area. We're buying and selling properties. We had rental properties that we had flipped. We did some joint ventures, some private lending, wholesaling, you name it. So we've had our fingers in a bunch of different pies, but in addition to that, we also decided that it might be a good idea to do something else as a second stream of revenue. As you guys in the investment group may recognize, one of the phrases that you need to have multiple streams of income. So typically for investors, you're looking at wholesaling properties, flips, or rehabs, whatever you want to call them, and rental properties. So those three streams of income are pretty standard in the industry, but we also started an inspection business as well. The purpose of that was not only to provide an additional stream of income, but it also, I think, uniquely positioned us to work with investors. And so by understanding what the market needs from an investment community, we market specifically to investors. And there's some reasons for that. I'm not going to get into the details on that, but I think that by having the background that we have in investing, it gives us a better understanding of what investors need. And our marketing and our inspections are geared towards investors on the front side of the house before you ever buy it. Mm-hmm. As most of the folks in the industry will recognize, you make your money when you buy the house, not when you sell it. And so if you're in a position where you may have paid too much for the house, that can spell problems down the road. And our inspections and our advice and training and thing is to help you to be better positioned when you buy that house and make sure that you don't pay too much for it. So that's where we come from. We do work in the retail market, of course. A good portion of our business is on the retail clients for people buying houses as their personal homes, but certainly a large portion of our market share is for folks that are buying investment properties. So that's where we come from, and we've been in the industry doing investment. This is working on my fourth year. September will be my 4th year in doing inspections. We've probably done getting close to 300 houses now in that time period. So we've got some experience under our belt. So a couple of things I wanted to mention when we get started is that majority of the investors are probably going to wonder, why would I want to get a house inspected? We're going to talk specifically about new construction right now and just give you a little data point. Nationally, less than 40% of the new construction homes ever get inspected. Now, that doesn't mean that the builders are building stuff without regard to any of the construction guides and builds. They are, but there's a lot of houses that get built with defects in them due to, you know, people making mistakes, because we're all humans, people working too fast, and in some cases, people just doing shoddy work. And so the intention is to find those properties and find those defects in the home, inform the client before they buy it. That way they can get them corrected. So I've got some pictures that I'm going to show the folks. These are all pictures from new construction that we're going to talk about today. And then once I'm going to cruise through these things pretty quickly. We're at about 20 minutes till, so I'm going to try to spend about half an hour or so on that. And from that point on, we'll give you some time to ask questions about stuff that you may have seen, or questions like, why would you want to work with an investor or inspector? What can an inspector bring to you into your business? Those types of questions, whether it's business related or something that you've seen. So Diego, I'm going to
go ahead and
share. If I can share the screen, I'm going to throw some pictures up first, and then see if I can get back to the share request. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing pictures specifically. Here we go. So let me get that out of the way. So that's full screen for me. Does everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Diego, you're gonna give me a nod if everything's are okay. I'll assume that everybody else is
seeing
it as well. So we're looking at the inside of a dishwasher here, and the dark colored stuff that you see on the frame of the dishwasher, that's mold, folks. So this is a brand new dishwasher in a brand new house, and there's mold growing on the inside of the dishwasher. So this was a house that I looked at about a year and a half ago, and as soon as that stabilizes, there's an up close picture that you see this mold growth on the inside of the dishwasher. Probably one of the questions you might ask, the same thing with homes when you encounter some sort of fungus in the house. Can you clean it? And is it safe after the fact? For a dishwasher or something like that, I would be hesitant to do it because it's going to get into the plumbing of the dishwasher, and it's going to be very difficult to clean it after that. If anybody out there has ever dealt with mold in houses, you may have found out that bleach, chemicals that are designed to get rid of mold and fungus that you can buy at Home Depot or specialty stores, ammonia, all sorts of different types of disinfectants won't get rid of mold completely. If it gets wet again, it starts to grow again. So in this case, the recommendation, at least for a dishwasher, was replace the dishwasher. So this was something that we found in a dishwasher after they had run it, and most likely had left it wet on the inside and didn't let it go through the dry cycle to get the temperature up and let it sort of decontaminate a little bit. Same house. This is the roof, and the shingles are not supposed to be laying on top of your plumbing penetrations like this, and they're supposed to be trimmed and sealed around the plumbing penetration so you don't get any water under it and the wind doesn't have an opportunity to lift it up. So we certainly don't want to see something like that. And then one of the most glaring things, this is a different plumbing penetration on that roof. And what we're seeing here is that they've cut the plumbing penetration the wrong way. If anybody's had any experience with the roofs, plumbing penetrations around, they have different holes in different concentric holes in it, different size plumbing can be used. And you just cut it out to the size that the plumbing penetration you have, and then they put some cement around there to glue it. And in this case, when they did it, all they did was they cut it in a straight line, opened it up, and put it on there. Most likely the guy that did this is probably inexperienced, or was probably learning a new trade or something like that. So here we have a leak. path for when it rains. This is on the high side, so it's definitely going to get water in it. It's going to go follow the plumbing pipe down. These are always inside the wall, so it's going to get the insulation wet, get inside the wall, and you're going to have to start having mold growth. That's probably going to be the first way you're going to notice it in that particular home. To find it is getting some mold growth. So let me pull up another picture here. I'm gonna stop the share real quick. We'll pull up
and Eric, before you continue there,
Sure.
we had a lady, an attendee by the name of Miss Karen asked, with the dishwasher mold, is that something common?
It's not very common. So far has only been one house that I found that I found it in, but that is certainly something that I look for. Something that is pretty common in homes is food debris, rust, and high level of undissolved soap in the bottom of the unit. Most likely, the thing that's most common as a defect in a dishwasher on the inside is actually rust. So, as anybody who has a dishwasher, you know that those racks are coated with rubber. Over a period of time, they get damaged, and they're steel on the inside, so they rust. And so now you have rust, which collects bacteria and potentially viruses that may be in the food or the water that grows in there. And then it's on that metal. It goes through the wash cycle, it spreads it around all on the dishes and the utensils there. And now you take it out. And if your dishwasher's not heating to the appropriate temperature to kill all that bacteria and stuff like that, then all you do is spread it onto your clean plates, and then you use it on food. So
Awesome.
not a good thing to have.
Excellent. Thanks for answering that question.
Sure, no problem. So let's talk about this one was just a couple of weeks ago. So let me bring this picture up, and we'll start the share. All right, so we're looking at some new construction here. This is something pretty common to the folks that have dealt with SVI. This is a type of construction where you have pretty common in areas of town where they're in transition, as they'll buy a couple of lots or something like that, and they'll build what's known as a common drive house. And we have 5 houses that were built. The one that I inspected is the one in the middle of the 3. And what was concerning about this to me is looking at was standing down in the bottom of the house. Sorry about the picture. These are large images. It takes a second for my computer to stabilize the image. I apologize for that. So what we're looking is the section of the home between each one of the other properties. So I'm standing by the front door in this picture, looking straight up. And so you can see this was actually a 4-story home. The 4th floor was mainly mechanical access and the roof access. And so we see a window up here, and then the rest of it is just the siding on the walls. And what flagged me, because even when the clients were there, I made mention to them. I said, these houses are pretty close together. There are some restrictions on fire protection, and so this even includes single-family homes that you may find on lots, either in older parts of town and even new parts of town, that there is a requirement to have a certain amount of distance between the properties, the residential portion of it, the living space, and different property. So what the concern here is that when you have a fire in a structure that's adjacent to your property, then you have to have a specific fire rating on each home that gives the inhabitants a certain amount of time to detect that fire and get away safely. The residential code, the International Residential Code, specifies that you must have a 1-hour fire barrier between 2 adjacent homes. And it dictates how the construction on the outside of the home is based upon the spacing required. So let me see if I can get the picture that I was looking for. It's a little farther down the line. So bear with me here just a moment. I'm gonna flip through a couple of pictures real quick. So this one is, I'm on the 3rd floor of the house, got my tape measure out, my old trusty tape measure, and we're measuring the distance between the 2 homes. And once it was in place, I moved my camera around, and we can see that the The spacing between the homes, now there's a piece of trim on the outside of this house on the corners. So we're gonna take a step back 1 inch so that the distance between the homes is 33 inches. So their international residential code specifies that if you have anywhere between 0 to 36 inches of space between a house, for a 1 hour fire barrier, you can have 0 penetrations on the outside of the house. So let's go back to the residential code real quick. So you guys can see that. Let me blow that up a little bit. So here the top one says 0 to 3 feet from the lot line. This is from the lot line. Here we've got less than 3 feet between the two structures.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a non-sprinklered house, so we're going to look on the left side of the image. It says 1 hour fire barrier, it says no openings. So why is that important? Well, let's go back to our pictures, folks. So we have a window in the middle of that wall on the second floor that's interrupted that fire barrier. So this was obviously very concerning to me when I found it. And I don't know everything, but I try to surround myself with people who do. So I went and used my resources to contact some other inspectors to ask them about what their thoughts were about the construction of this home. And one of the things that came out of that was that the walls could be assembled such a way that they could be a 1 hour fire barrier. So I did a little more research, found out that if you use a cement fiber board, which this is a panel, and this looks like something from a company called James Hardie. And so I went to their website and did some research, and I don't know if this is a James Hardie panel or not, but at least I did a little bit more research. I went beyond what's required by the state of Texas for a home inspection, and I found that James Hardie has done some studies and some research, and some independent companies have gone out and done some testing with them. And if you construct your home in such a way that it is recommended by these third-party testing facilities, and you include a James Hardie panel on the outside of the house, you can have a 1 hour fire barrier, but it has to be constructed that way. Now, the problem comes in is now we have a window in the house. We've put an opening in that 1 hour fire barrier, and this is assuming that it is, and I don't know that for a fact, at least at this point in my investigation. Through some additional research, I did find some companies that make 1 hour fire barrier windows, but they don't look like the windows that were in this house. So my conclusion at that point was that this doesn't meet the requirements of a 1 hour fire barrier in a residential structure. However, in my opinion, the builder could have constructed the house using the appropriate material and construction materials and designs that are required for a 1 hour fire barrier. But from what I could do from my inspections and my investigation, I couldn't prove that. So I put the ownership back on the builder to prove it to the client that the fire barrier did exist and it was built the way the civil engineer designed it to meet those requirements, and that they should consult with the builder to ensure that it was built to those specifications. So this is new construction. This was on the market, did the inspection about 2 weeks ago. So this is an example of where this is a pretty dramatic representation of an issue with new construction. So let's move along to, so we looked at this. So this is a new construction home as well. So here we're looking at the inside of the house. Most of y'all will be familiar with the wall construction in residences that they use vertical studs. So there's going to be a wood board at the bottom, wood board in the top, does the bottom plate and the top plate. And then you have your studs that go down your wall. The residential code specifies that you can drill a hole in that stud and you can cut a notch in it. But there's limitations on what you can drill in it and what you can notch it. In this particular case, the builder had cut it with what looks like a circular saw. They had just run it 3/4 of the way through the board, and they installed it that way. Now, to help with that, they put another board on the other side of it to give it some strength, and said, hey, no problem, we've strengthened that board. In this particular house, I have found about 30 examples where they had done this. And of course, it got me thinking about why did they do this? Why would you cut all of these studs? Because you can see in the background of that picture, none of those other studs would cut.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I could come up with is I think they may have cut all these studs like 1/8 of an inch too long so that they didn't fit. And so they cut them 1/8 of an inch, which is the width of a saw blade. And then they could force them in there, and that stud would just compress just enough that they could do that. And they put these boards on the side. So like I said, there was about 30 examples in there. And in addition to that, let me see, hang on a second.
Mm-hmm.
Got to find the right picture. Sorry about that. Bear with me, folks.
Yep. And in regards to the distance between the properties and building, less than 3 feet, from the lot line. Lynn Michael Perez in San Antonio asked, how did they get through the permitting office? How did it get through that for them to build?
That's a good question. And I got to thinking about that because, when I find something like that, I always, I got to take a step back and say, am I seeing this right? Am I right in what I'm concluding here? Sort of second guess myself and making sure that I'm doing, my due diligence and making sure that I've come to the right conclusion. And so the first thing I thought about was like, okay, well, this is fire related, right? So why wouldn't would the fire marshal come out and take a look at this particular home? And I came to the conclusion that the answer is no, unless it has some sort of fire suppression system in it. And since this is a non-sprinklered home, fire marshal is not going to look at that. So I said, okay, well, would the city inspector look at something like that? Yeah, I would think they would, but most of what I've seen is the inspections are related to electrical, plumbing, rough-in, and things are related to the trades. And maybe didn't think to look at that. Maybe he's not familiar with it, or she, or maybe that's just not part of it. Because I know that the city inspectors are, they're looking at multiple houses during the day, so they may only spend 10 minutes at a house, or maybe 15 minutes or something like that. So they may not have a opportunity to look at a lot of these different things. And it's possible that they may not be that familiar with it. But certainly that the home inspector should be familiar with it to find something like that. So, I think there's probably some opportunities where this might've gotten caught, if this really is an issue. But at this point, we don't know, because when the house gets to retail sales stage, all those inspection forms and stuff like that, those are all gone. But the builder should have a record of that, and be able to prove it. And if the house was truly constructed to meet a 1-hour fire requirement, the civil engineer that designed it and stamped those drawings would have a record of it, because his name is on those drawings. Mm-hmm. And if he didn't check that and that got missed, that guy could be in some big trouble.
Yeah. And we've built a lot of subdivides in the Heights area of Houston, and a lot of times we've seen properties that are even closer to that. What the main governing document for all of that, there's a common area maintenance agreement that between the two owners, they've agreed that one person can step on this person's property, because you start to see how are they going to even fix siding, or yep, anything in between there without coming onto other people's property. But it is definitely, it is accepted unless it has things like what you were talking about that the inspection called out for. So
yeah,
I think they got lucky.
Yeah, and like I said, it may be constructed to meet that requirement, but mm-hmm, based on the information that I had with looking at the home, it didn't meet the requirements. Right. And certainly from my research, it was possible to be done, but it's on the builder to be able to prove
yep,
that.
Absolutely.
So getting back to our studs here. So this is one of the studs in the house. And what's important about here in this picture is you can see on the back side over here that this stud actually failed. So this line, this white line here on the left side of the image, this stud is already broken. And when the builder ended up calling me after the client sent the pictures to him and asked them to go in and make repairs, and he was like, well, we can't go in and replace all those studs. And I said, well, yeah, you can. And I said, you need to. And I said, you already have 2 examples, because I found 2 of them that had already failed in the house. And I said, so if you already have 2 failures and you haven't even gotten to pre-drywall, I said, it makes every one of those other boards, other studs, suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some other framing issues in there that you know was questionable in my opinion, and certainly didn't meet the requirement, because you're only allowed to cut the studs a certain amount, and beyond that, then you have to do some reinforcement. And they were way beyond what was allowed. They're only, for a 2x4, you're only allowed for 7/8 of an inch of a cut, and here we're like 2 inches of cut. So what's ironic about this whole situation is, after I had the conversation with him, and you know, he asked me how I should, you know, what I recommended, and I told him, I can't tell you that. I said, that's your responsibility, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you what you can and cannot do. And I sent him a graphic to let him know what he could do for cutting of the studs, because one of the issues is that through these studs, you have to pass electrical wiring through the studs. So you got a stud here, and you got to pass the electrical through it, and you're allowed to drill a hole in it to do that. You're allowed to drill a 1/2 inch hole in it to pass the electrical through that. And I asked him, I said, are you going to pull the wiring back there? And he's like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. That's too much work, because he would have to send an electrician back out there to do this after they've done the framing. So the electrician have to come in, pull the wires out, put the framing in, then they have to run the wires. That's a lot of time, a lot of money. He wasn't going to pay for that. So they said, well, we're going to put a stud beside it, and we'll just replace it. And I said, what are you going to do to pass the wires? And he said, we'll just cut a shallow notch in it just to pass the wire through it, and then we'll put a metal plate over the end of the stud. And that's allowed. You can cut a notch in the face of the stud, put the wire through there, but if it's less than 1.25 inches from the edge of the stud, the wire is, then you have to put a metal plate over it. And that's normal. And I said, yep, sounds like a good repair. That's a good compromise to go in and do that. So the client said, well, they're going to do this stuff tomorrow. Can you go back the day after and take a look at it? I said, absolutely. I went out there the next day, and I looked at the studs, and guess what they did? They cut them again. They cut them 1.25 inches deep. They're only allowed 7/8, so they cut them 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches. They cut a notch in every one of them so that they could pass that wire through it, and then they put the plate on the outside. And so I flagged it again, sent him the report. The builder called me, and he's like, I don't get it. What do you want me to do? I was like, you replaced the problem board, the ones that had the problem, with the exact same problem. I said, you've done nothing. You've done nothing to correct the problem. And he said, well, there's twice as many studs in this house as there's supposed to be. You don't think this is going to fall down, do you? And I'm like, I'm not going to answer that. And I said, you have to decide that. I said, but you've already had failed studs in the house. I said, that makes all of them suspect. And his response was, after a long conversation with him, he said, I'm going to call my civil engineer and talk to him about it and see what he says. And I said, excellent this opportunity to get clarification on that. Let's see what they say. I got a text message from him that afternoon. Framer's going out there to refix all the studs. I said, excellent plan, which was what I was suspecting, because the civil engineer didn't want his name on that, because his license is on the line. So
that's right.
We had at least 2 examples of where it failed, and they had 30+ examples where they had damaged the studs in this manner. And then when they came back to make the repairs, they did the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So crazy stuff that happens. This is new construction. So why would you want to have your house inspected, right? These are some examples of why not. So here's the last ones that I'm going to go through, and we're going to take a look at these. And I got 7 o'clock, so we'll stretch this out for about 10 minutes or so, and let them ask questions. So let's get this going and share my screen. All right. So we're looking at a brand new roof. So we're looking at the bottom of the shingle. So what's important about this is I should not be able to lift that shingle up. So if you see on here, there's some text on here. Let's zoom in, see what it says. So those of you folks that are good at reading backwards, this is CERTAINTEED. So that's a shingle manufacturer called Shirt and Teed. And so what this piece of cellophane is, this is an adhesive strip that they're supposed to remove from the shingle when they do the installation. And when they put that back down, these black areas is an adhesive which sticks to the shingle below it. And so when the shingles get hot, that gets really soft and gooey, and it sticks to the shingle below it, and you can't lift it up. And when I was on the roof, I just happened to reach over and just lift up on one of the shingles, and this is what I found. And I was actually out at this was the second time I was at the house. I was at the house this morning, the third time, and I walked out the same section of roof and I found 4 more shingles that were like that, where I could lift them up, where they had taken that cellophane off and removed that adhesive so it was able to stick to the shingles. So I saw the chat had flashed a couple times there. Diego, did somebody have a question specific about this particular picture?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So moving right along, so there is where this roof comes down, there's a vertical wall that's going to have brick attached to it. So let me, so this is the flashing from a vertical wall where the shingles are intersecting with it. And so this is a flashing that's required. And there's supposed to be on the decking, the plywood, in this case they use OSB, which is oriented strand board. It looks like a bunch of pieces of wood have been all glued together, which is exactly what that is. And they use that as decking. It's less expensive than plywood, and it's not as susceptible to deterioration as particle board is. But when the first step after you put the decking down on the roof is you're supposed to put down a underlayment, which is a waterproof barrier. They start at the bottom of the roof and they work their way up with overlapping each successive layer. And when I got over here, this flashing, I was able to just very easily lift up on the edge of that, those shingles, and lift up not only the shingles, but I also lifted up the underlayment. So the underlayment should have gone all the way over to the vertical wall underneath that flashing. And so it's clear that the 2 things here where they installed that underlayment, number 1 is it's not adhered to the roof. It's supposed to be nailed down or stapled down, or they can use an adhesive. And 2 is it doesn't go all the way to the wall. So this was obviously a red flag for me. And what was, I guess, unique about this, in addition to it, is the first time I was at the house was after we had a very heavy rain here in the Houston area. So Diego, you probably nod your head since you live in the area that was hit by that. So we had basically had 2 fronts kind of hit one another over the Katy and Cypress area, and it rained for about 8 hours. And I think there were some parts of town that got close to 11 inches of rain. And this was one of those areas that got a considerable amount of rain. So when I did the inspection that morning, there was leaks in the ceiling that was leaking in the master bathroom of that house. It's unfinished on the inside, and there were leaks. And the thing about water is it always is higher up on the area where it leaks at. It rarely leaks through and then drips immediately. But most likely somewhere along this edge is where that leak was originating, and where I saw it on the decking in the master bathroom was where it manifested itself. So most likely it was leaking in this area. So so this is just a different picture. You can see how the shingles are not stuck to the roof, and the underlayment is certainly not adhered to it. So one of the problems I had was trying to understand from the residential code and from the building codes is what is the requirement for shingles overlapping the flashing on a vertical wall. And from my investigation and digging into the code book, trying to find it, there really is no requirement to have any sort of standardized overlap on the flashing. So I thought about it for a minute and I said, okay, well, what else can I use as a reference? We may provide a solution to that. And so for the folks out there in the Zoom land, you have to keep in mind that there are building code books for electrical, plumbing, building structure, roofs, pools, mechanical, and which includes the HVAC, foundations. They're all out there, but the manufacturer of any product that's used in the construction of the home has precedence over any building code that is international, national, state, or city related, or a city ordinance. So the manufacturer of these shingles, these flashings, the manufacturer of the decking, if they have instructions that state that it should be installed in such a manner, that takes precedence over everything else. So I spent a little time on some different websites, and I found this on one of the particular shingle manufacturer that says that here's your vertical flashing that you see, which is known as a step flashing. And down here at the bottom, it says that there's a minimum overlap between the wall and where the shingles touch the wall of 5 inches. And so from our pictures there, we can see that that's not being met. And when my report went to the client, I didn't tell them specifically that this was 5 inches is what's required, because this is a shingle manufacturer. This actually happens to be Owens Corning, but I went to 3 different other manufacturers and I copied this picture from their installation instructions and put that in my report. And I didn't specify which manufacturer it was, but they all look pretty much the same. And I left it to the builder to determine and have a short or long discussion with his roofer about how these should have been installed and how they were supposed to be installed. And when he called me about it, the only comment I had is I said, based on what I can find and based on my pictures and what I saw at the site, I said that your roofer's letting you down. I said, because he's certainly not installing it to the manufacturer's specifications. And I said, because the pictures I have don't look like that drawing. I said, now, if you feel like that you can defend that to your client, then you need to have that conversation with them. But one of the things that, as investors out there, when you're working on projects, and myself as an inspector, I always think about this from a worst case scenario. And to me, the worst case scenario is me sitting in a chair in a courtroom explaining what I saw or what was in my report. And so I always think of it from that perspective. And so in my mind, I was picturing that builder sitting in a courtroom with a picture of this on a big board and an attorney asking him questions about if this was how the roof was installed. And if his answer was yes or no, that's usually how they word their questions, is either yes or no, is could he defend that in a court of law? And for my personal opinion is I didn't think that he could. And so I left these pictures in there for him to have a discussion with his client and with the roofer about whether he felt like that this was installed properly or not. Because from what I could see from the manufacturer's documentation, it wasn't. So these are 4 instances of things that I found in new construction. So if we find this in new construction, which is supposed to be new, then what do you think you're going to find in a house that's maybe 10 years old or 20 years old? Or if you're doing residential redevelopment, you might be working on houses that might be 30, 40, 50 years old. And so you might be able to find some other interesting things that might be owner installed, so that the owner of the home did some repairs or maybe did some additions to the home. Or you might even have some contractors out there doing some work on the house that is not their home. So maybe they're not quite as careful with it as they would be if it was their personal property. So with that, it's about 10 after or so. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share here, Diego, and open the floor up for questions.
I think one of the most important things in what you said, Eric, is that if that is what's being done to a house that is going from nothing to something, and when you're building property, there are many inspections. Every stage has an inspection before you move on to the next one. That's city inspectors, that's superintendents, that even is lenders that'll come out and inspect that too. And these things sometimes seem to get through the cracks. So that is definitely a main reason why I'd like for you to touch base a little bit more on the rehab side, knowing that these are things that we can't see because we don't know if they were done. So I think if we could focus a little bit more on what are the most important visuals or things that you can see as a person walking a house that they've never walked before in their life, and that they should trigger in their mind, I think I need to call Eric, or I think I need to get an inspection. Because we call you on the inspections prior to buy houses. And the most important thing there is we're trying to identify how big this future issue is going to be, and
how big the problem is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and then there's a couple of things that I'd want to cover in that. So I'm going to do a quick brain dump real quick. I'm going to talk really fast, cover a bunch of stuff. So hopefully everybody that catches this. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that I don't know everything, and investors don't know everything. So one of the mantras that I have lived by through my life was that you can't know everything. So surround yourself with people who do. So get the right people on your team that you can ask questions to. You don't have to be the expert in walking that property.
Correct.
So if you need an inspector, which I do recommend, not just because I'm an inspector and I have a business in that case, but because they can help you to ensure that you're making money on your property and you're not going to pay too much for it. So that's one of the things. How inspectors can help you out as an investor is they can help you to identify something that you may miss in a walkthrough, because sometimes you may only have 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour. So if you're looking at a property that's a wholesale, then that's a good opportunity to have somebody have a second set of eyes to go with you. So consider talking to an inspector who may be looking at the electrical panel or things that may be a little bit more serious when you're trying to figure out, am I going to reface my cabinets, or am I going to keep this countertop, or hey, that door looks like it's okay, I don't need to replace it or not. And your inspector may say, that wall's got termites. So those are things that you want to make sure that you got somebody who's going to help you out in that regard, especially to help make that repair estimate as accurate as possible. So that's one thing that certainly can help you with it. But when you're walking through a house, and this is something I tell my retail clients as well, when you're walking through a house, and if you looking around the room, your eye is going to be drawn to something that doesn't look right. If you're looking at a wall and it's supposed to be nice and smooth, then and you look at something like that and it's not, and you see something that looks like maybe I don't know, like it's just got crown molding on it, the crown molding's falling off. Why would it be falling off? Your eyes are going to be drawn to that. You should look a little bit more closely at what might be causing that. Mm-hmm. Open and close the door. If you go into a room and you open and close the door, just stand there for 10 seconds. Does the door start to close on you? Not supposed to do that. So that may be an issue. If you walk across the room, you can get to the window, open the window. See if you can open the window. Maybe it's really hard. We do have to, sort of sometimes make that statement is like in the Houston area, we don't open our windows very much. It's hot and humid here pretty much year round. So we don't open our windows much. So sometimes it could be that it's just that window hadn't been opened in 15 years. But in some cases, it's because the foundation is moved. And so that's one of the things, if you walk around the outside of the house, walk around the inside of the house, looking at the floor, the walls, the ceiling, doors, windows, things like that. If something doesn't look right, pay attention to that and take a little bit closer look. One of the other things that I tell my clients, especially my investors, the best thing that you can do for yourself is buy a really good flashlight. And I don't mean going one of these tactical flashlights you see on TV that say they can shoot for 400 yards or something like that. That's a load of crap. Those flashlights are crap. I have 2 of them, and they're not very good. Buy a really good flashlight. The one that I use for my inspections, I paid $90 for it. Has rechargeable batteries in it, and I have 2 of them. I can recharge it anywhere I go, and I use it all the time. And it's a company. I'm gonna put a plug out there because it's a really good flashlight. It's a company called Phoenix, and that's F-E-N-I-X. And their flashlights aren't cheap, but you should keep one in your car. Nowadays, you should have masks in your car, gloves, a really good flashlight. Mm-hmm. What else do you have in your heart? Tape measure. Keep tape measure. Maybe some hiking boots if you're going to be stomping around in the yard. Mm-hmm. So those are good things to have for you when you're walking properties. But this is going to be your most important tool, is looking around and seeing whether you see something that looks odd with a house. Now that flashlight, sometimes you're going to be walking properties that don't have utilities on, so that flashlight's going to be your friend. The other thing I want to mention to you is when you take that flashlight, is turn it on a bright setting and put it over against the wall and just rotate it around. Let that beam play across that wall. When you do that, it's going to, any imperfections in the house, in that wall, things that might be out of whack, or the wall might be crooked, or it might be bowed out or something like that, that stuff's going to jump out like a neon sign. Mm-hmm. So that flashlight is going to be worth its weight in gold, and it's going to pay for itself the first time you use it.
And Eric, it's funny you said that about making sure spending some time to walk properties. And this is something that I can recommend to, and I always recommend it to a lot of our members that are new in investing, is observe. So I always tell people, go to as many wholesale showings as possible, not with the intention of buying the house, but the intention of watching. And it is so shocking to see how many people walk a house with basically they're walking around like this, just taking notes, and they're not opening doors. They're not lifting carpets. They're not opening windows. I think the funniest thing that I ever did was, I knew a house had termites, right? And then there's something that people don't know, is that termites will make little tunnels of mud in your behind the walls and everything. So I knew something about something called termite rain, which is you start banging on the wall and you can hear the mud particles start to fall off the wall. And that tells you that
Yeah.
there's channels, there's mud tunnels there.
Yeah, it's called carton nest.
Right, right. So after I did that, it was hilarious. Somebody heard me do that in another room, that whole house, people were just banging on walls everywhere. And it was hilarious. And it was something new that people learned in that walk. So you'll learn many, many new things by walking properties, and just that's what you should be spending your time on.
Yeah, here's a funny investing story. Here's a good one. So one of your former students, Manuel,
Mm-hmm.
so he bought a property that's not far from where the old office was at. I won't say the name because I'm not going to give anything away, but there was a wholesale deal that he went and looked at. This was one of his first, he works on the $500,000 market, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the Houston area, that's a pretty pricey house. And in California, that's nothing.
Right.
But in Houston, that's a pricey house. So he went to that, he asked me to go to that property. Pedro went as well. And there was about 9 or 10 investors walking that property during that showing. And he asked me to come in there, and he's like, he gets real close and he said, "Can you tell us what you find really loud?" And I was like, "Sure." And so we walked through the house, and it's like, "Yeah, I see this." And I saw that. In about 30 minutes, there was only 3 investors in the house. So the rest of them were out the door because they were hearing things that they had not seen.
Yes.
And had realized that this was not a lipstick on a pig type of flip. And of course, I think he spent $80,000 on that flip, so that wasn't trivial. But that's a funny story in that regard. But your inspector can do that if you want to do that and see if you can chase off some inexperienced investors. That way, when you're walking properties that are wholesales, you can do that as a practice too.
Yeah, I think most of all also is research. If you were to tell right now the people that are attending any particular web pages that they might go to learn about not becoming an investor, obviously, but knowing how to identify and to have the glasses of an investor. I know it because you've done my investment houses, you've done my personal home. My wife loved you on our last home purchase. And it's because you're thorough. It's because you see things through different lenses. So if somebody needed to practice to look through different lenses, I know at SVI, you've given us many different web pages to go to check on codes and to check on appraisals, to check on termites, everything. What would you say a good web page to go and check out is?
That's a tough thing. There's one, each state is a little bit different. I know for Texas, so I'm going to digress just a little bit, but Texas, to be an inspector in Texas, you have to follow what's known as their standard of practice. The governing agency for inspectors in Texas is TREC. And sorry about that. Sorry about that. So TREC is our governing body. They have a standard of practice. If you want to get a little bit more education, look up your state requirements and see if they have a standard of practice that inspectors are supposed to follow. There are some states out there that do not have any requirements for inspectors. And so all you need is a business card and you can be an inspector. So there's a few states out there that way, but that's a good resource just to understand what inspectors are going to be looking for. But there's also, all of the code books are basically codified in an organization called ICC, so the International Code Council. And you guys can Google that and go to that website, and you can pretty much look at every code book out there. Bore yourself to tears, but they're out there, and you can read them online. They're available out there. You can buy you can't do anything with them, so you can't do screen captures, you can't do copy and pastes or anything like that. Their web pages are armored against that sort of thing, but you can pay for a membership and you can get access to all that. But those things are out there, and you can use them certainly as a resource. But you don't have to be that expert. Hire somebody to be that expert out there, because you have to figure out what your time is worth. And and what I charge my investors to walk a property with them, is probably less than what their time per hour should be. and they don't need to be that expert. They just need to know some things, about the house to see whether it looks like it's going to be a good deal or not. And then hire, have inspectors or have the right people on your team that are going to be able to help you with that thing. So the International Code Council is certainly a good place to look. Your local states regulations that for inspectors. And if any of you out there that are investors are also realtors, then you know that there's going to be requirements on you, and you kind of have to watch yourself in that regard. And one of our investors that we work with, as an example, he's a realtor, and so when we do our inspections on his properties, he don't want to know anything about it. So he has his contractors hire me, and my reports go to that contractor, and they make the decisions on how and what they're going to fix, basically with a discussion with the investor. And they never disclose anything. So he, as a realtor, he's not been notified of that defect in that home, and he doesn't want to know. He doesn't have to. He's running his business. He's running that business, which he's hiring the people to go and flip that house for him and hire those contractors. He doesn't need to know that stuff. And the contractor hires the inspector, and that communication happens with them. That's perfectly legal. And it protects him against anything that may have been found and then subsequently fixed. And then the retail buyer may say, oh, well, you should have known about this. He's like, I didn't hire the guy. The report went to my contractor. So it's a way to help you with that. And they can do that, the same thing when you're talking with your clients about your houses. Once you've negotiating price, if you've got an inspector who's giving you that information, you can share that information with the homeowner and let them know what defects you found in the home that may have to adjust your price with.
Right. And Eric, Karen's asking here, Eric, do you or does your company come to San Antonio, Texas? Karen, I can tell you that we do have an inspector for San Antonio through SVI. And Eric, when we were bringing the gentleman, Mr. Dudley, on board to be the inspector for the SVI office, who do you think I asked him to vet him out? Had Eric. So Eric pretty much ran the poor guy through the ringer. So he met our quality check there. But Karen, if you want to go ahead and send an email over to Enid, Enid can get you the information for inspector contact there.
Yeah, certainly Dudley can help you out. He has experience. He understands how we do things over here in the Houston side, because we're a little unique in that regard. But if you just absolutely have to have me out there, if you want to pay a trip fee out there, I can stay at the Riverwalk and have a couple of margaritas that evening.
Well, you've done it. When we've walked houses with members in San Antonio, you've gone and given us full-blown house walks.
It's a little outside our normal operating range, but we have done houses that have been a pretty good clip away, and we have to charge a trip fee, obviously, because it's our time that we spend in the car.
So one thing that we talked about a lot, obviously we talked about a lot about new construction, guys. That's a completely different beast in itself. But also understanding the reason why it's important to use an inspector, but asking questions to a qualified inspector, not just on the front end. But one practice that we have is that prior to that house going into being listed or through the final punch list, we call Eric and we're like, okay, contractor's done, rip it up, because that's the difference of us paying for his services and our inspection report is this big. Then when the buyer orders their own inspection, if we didn't do that, it would be this big. Now think about who gets to explain that inspection report to the new buyer. Yeah. Their realtor. And in some cases, the realtors are calling us and asking us questions, and we're like, you don't know that? And it can be pretty scary, and you don't want to lose a potential buyer that loves a property just because they're explaining something that
may or may not be an issue.
May or may not be an issue. That is correct. So highly recommend prior to listing that, getting yourself and investing the capital in that, because it's very important, because that's I think in the past we learned very fast that the whole happiness leaves the room when that inspection report comes out. And then it becomes into like, oh my God, did we just lose this because of not adding extra dirt to the elevation so the water runs off, and it's just many minimal things.
Yeah, and you can qualify that just a little bit, Diego, because it does sometimes depend upon the price point of your houses. If you're operating in, maybe 120, 125 and stuff like that, you're not going to get multiple inspections. But folks that here in the Houston area that are dealing with houses in the $500,000 retail market, I may look at that house 2, 3, sometimes 4 times, and they pay full price on my inspections for that. We give them a discount because it's repeat business, but they're paying a bit more on the inspection side because something that pops up, buyer wants a $5,000 price concession, that easily pays for all of the inspections right then and there.
Yeah.
If it's a $150,000 house and they want a $5,000 price concession on it or something like that, that's a big piece, and you're not going to get that. And so it just depends on what market you're operating in, and do that. And certainly talk to your inspectors about the pricing and how they can help you in that regard.
Yep. And so does anybody have any questions? We're down to a couple minutes here. And let's see here, Miss Karen, if you happen to have a pen handy, I can go ahead and give you, it's actually, sorry, we call him Dudley, but it's actually Dustin Hall. And I can give you Dustin's phone number. He's with Priority Inspection Services. If you want me to go ahead and give that over to you, I'd be happy to. All right, give me one quick second. Enid, if you don't mind, typing this out here for just a second. Let me make sure you got this. It's 979 571 0220, and his name is Dustin Hall. Dustin Hall. Or feel free to go ahead and, all right, awesome. Let's see, Lynn asked, I missed this. Did you recommend a final inspection before listing? Yes, depending on price point. Make sure depending on the price point that you're wanting to go into.
Yeah, and I mean, usually for something like that, ultimately, inspector's going to find something. No matter what you do, how you rehab the house or brand new, whatever, we're going to find something. That's our job. So we're going to find things wrong with it. But if there's 50 things wrong with it, there might be 5 of them that might be important. What you're trying to do is you certainly want your inspector before your house goes on the market is to shorten that buyer's list as much as possible. Because even if there's 50 non-important things, then it still looks like the house got problems.
Absolutely.
Maybe he didn't find something that was important, but he found all these little issues, and man, this looks like this house has got some problems. That's what you don't want. What you want to do is give that buyer as little information as possible to come back to you and change your price that you're asking for your house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or ask for repairs.
Right. We've seen inspection lists that potentially under the eyes of the buyer could have been a $15,000 discount. And by having the cost of spending in your inspection, the reduction was only $2,500. That's a cost saver. So Eric, we want to thank you so much for your information. We are going to post this here on our StratiVentures YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Do you have any closing comments that you want to give everybody before we close this out?
Well, I appreciate everybody's time. I know that inspections is not always the most entertaining type of topic, but if you're an investor, you're going to see some really crazy stuff out there. And so sometimes you're going to encounter stuff that may be scratching your head, and having an inspector handy to you, can take a picture and send it to them, or call them, or send them an email or something like that, is well worth your effort of getting somebody added to your list of experts out there. Doesn't it? Even if it's not me, and if you're buying a house, get it inspected. Yep. It's money well spent. It really is.
Excellent. And so everybody, thank you so much. If you guys want to know more about StratiVentures and everything that we do to help the investor community, we work with great vendors. We have amazing people on our team. We have a lot of good new up and coming and things that are happening at StratiVentures. For those of you that want to sit down with us, I would love to sit with you, get to know you, and most of all, find out if there's a plan of action that we can help you take on, because we have to, we're in new times right now, and we see new things coming in the forecast here, probably from now to the end of the year, So I believe it's strongly it's about preparing yourself for a lot of changes that are coming in the industry. So, yep.
And don't
All right.
forget to tell, I went through your course too, and I survived.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Made you a better man. No, you're an Aggie dude, so you're good. All right, everybody. Everybody have a great evening. There's a QR code that you can go ahead and scan here on the screen. And just know that we're here to help you out every day. Bye, guys.